Hey, what's up, everybody? Malaysia, there we go. Dimitri, good to see everybody. Today's a special day, actually. Happens to be my birthday. So, I figured I'd come on live here for a little bit and give people a chance to join in here. I'm going to try and answer a bunch of questions that I get asked all the time that I don't have a chance to answer in the comment sections or from the emails that I get. And been getting a lot of emails lately. So, couple things. People that are asking me about college. I have a lot of people that have been emailing me about colleges, about my opinions on colleges. And I'll just state for the record that I'm 55 today, and I don't have any kids in college, and I haven't been in college in a long time. So my opinion on colleges is not... I wouldn't say I'm the foremost expert on giving people advice, or I wouldn't say I'm the person to give people advice on what to go to college for. Although I will say some general principles on that if you're getting a degree that doesn't allow you the ability to pay back your loans if you're going to go in debt, that's something to think about. So that's kind of what I'll say on that. My new sounding off with Adam Neely that came out last night, and I want to thank Adam for being my guest. We talked a little bit about this, about there's an industry of churning out people with college degrees that don't have an avenue for getting jobs. For example, the jobs in recording studios. There's very few recording studios left. So if you get a degree in sound engineering, you have to think about the reality. Are you learning the sound engineering because you're going to work as a producer on your own and you're doing that? To me, one of the most important parts of college is that you actually grow up in college and you interact with people and you learn how to live on your own. And that interaction and the people you meet, a lot of my college friends are still my best friends in life. So that experience alone was worth going to college for. But you do have to balance how much money you're going to be able to make versus how much money you borrow to go to school, because school is extremely expensive these days. So that's my, for people that are emailing me about college and asking me questions like that. That's kind of my short take on it. I will have a further developed take later on. I'm very pro-college, but I'm not pro going into incredible debt to do that. And that was kind of an interesting thing on Steve Vai's sounding off, where he talked about that. As he said, there's, occasionally have lean years as a musician, especially musicians that rely on royalty income streams. If you have records, depending on what it is and when royalty streams happen. And for example, certain royalties come in at certain times. Record sale royalties, until you recoup on a record, if you're a producer, sometimes I had a record that recouped that I did in 2011 that sold about 400,000 copies, but it took from 2011 to 2016 to recoup. So it's not just that my cost as a producer, there's a producer advance that needs to get recouped. And typically a producer makes on a major label record, $3,000 per song. You get paid as an advance that is a recoupable advance, depending on how many songs you do. And usually 3 points or 4 points if you're the mixer also. Now, if you're Max Martin, you get paid $100,000 for a track and you get points on it, and you're the writer of it. So, obviously that's a tremendously big difference. But for a producer on a track on a major label record, that's how much they typically make. And until the band recoups their money that was spent on that particular record, the producer doesn't get paid, even if his money has been recouped from the royalties. They keep the money in escrow, and then they finally pay you once the band has recouped. There's this thing called cross-collateralization that you might have heard of if you read music business books, which is basically carry debt from record to record. If a band makes their first record and they don't recoup on the money that they've been advanced to make the record, let's say they have been advanced $250,000, and they, on their 13% that they make, although that's not really the case now because all deals with major labels for the most part are 360 deals, meaning they get part of your publishing, part of your merchandise, part of your live touring and record sales. They basically reach into your pocket for all these different things, depending on whether or not you're well known and have it going on beforehand. There's people that are YouTube stars that will have 1 billion plays on YouTube and sell 1 million records that get signed to major labels because they can sell 1 million records because they're big on YouTube, but they can't necessarily get on terrestrial radio, meaning radio stations. So that's something to think about on that end. Now, the topic today is about DAW's studio gear and what things to purchase or what you need to know about in order to do the kind of jobs that you want to do. Some people have asked me about this, my opinion on DAWs, and depending on what you're using these things for. When I talked to Mark Isham and I asked him what DAW he uses, he said Logic. Well, people that do film scoring typically will use Logic or they'll use Digital Performer. Logic is pretty much the most common one for film scorers, except for the fact that he said when he records acoustic instruments, he uses Pro Tools, and he links the two systems together. Now, in order to play all of his samples, he uses Vienna Ensemble Pro, which is a plugin that allows 32 or 64-bit Mac and Windows systems to communicate with each other over a network using an Ethernet connection. Okay, so you can have, let's say, 3-4 computers that are holding sample libraries that make them accessible through this plugin all at once. That's what your typical film scorer will use. So the host computer might be you might have an iMac, you might have a Mac trash can that's super fast, that's actually hosting the program that you're using. But they'll also have other, they might have a couple PCs, they might have a couple Macs holding sample libraries, and you might have an East-West on this one, you might have their entire library, you might have Spitfire Audio, you might have Vienna Symphonic Library on another one. These are massively big programs, and in order to call up patches and be able to audition patches really quickly, you need to actually network the computers through this. This is pretty much what most people that do film scoring use. Now, for production and recording, just for regular production where you're actually recording live instruments, which if you do film scoring, they record live instruments all the time too. If you listen to Hans Zimmer, Thomas Newman, people like that use hybrid scores, Mark Isham, they're recording live instruments in addition to using plugins that have synthesizer-based plugins, whether you're using Omnisphere or you're using Rev, which is a really cool plugin that does all these reverse sounds. They're great for sound effects. There's tons of programs that do keyboard that are synthesizer sounds that you'll use and you'll combine. Those can be either done via MIDI and all controlled, or you can use vintage synthesizers like Mark does. And a lot of people will use actual vintage synthesizers, which I happen to have, and I will plug them in out of the outputs and go in through a stereo pair of mic pre's. Or some of the synthesizers are mono, and you just go in through one mic pre and you'll record it into Pro Tools typically, because typically Pro Tools is used for that. Logic can be used for it, but Logic is not as good with editing sound. That's the one thing. Now, I have Logic 10, and I have an import, or I imported all the key commands of Pro Tools, which I've been using for 17 years, into Logic. So when I open Logic for myself, I run it as if it's Pro Tools, and all the key commands, whether I'm zooming in, whether I'm cutting a piece of audio and I want to put in an edit point, no matter what I do, all my key commands in Logic are exactly the same as Pro Tools. This is actually something that they offered in Logic 9, but they don't offer in Logic 10. But I actually got it from the I actually got it from the guy that developed Logic, who I did an interview for that a friend of mine set up. He interviewed me because he wanted to. He was interviewing people that owned both Logic and Pro Tools and wanted to know. He actually wanted to tell me about Logic 10. This is a few years ago, actually, probably 2-3 years ago, and he gave me a copy of Logic 10 from that. And then he made me the template that they didn't include in Logic 10 for the Pro Tools key commands, which was actually very cool. Because that's one of the problems with anytime you learn a new software, a DAW, or if you're using a notation software. I have both Sibelius and Finale and Guitar Pro. I have Guitar Pro 6 and 7. I prefer Guitar Pro 6, even though Guitar Pro 7 just came out. I probably shouldn't say that, but I like Guitar Pro 6. So anyways, if you're recording audio, the reason that Pro Tools really took off is because it is similar to what a console looks like. I mean, that was really the key. I mean, there was really no choices. They had Logic back. I want to say they had Logic. I was just trying to think. That's why I was thinking, when did Logic actually come out? Pro Tools, the early versions of Pro Tools were in the 90s. If you look back, I want to say 91 was the first time that Pro Tools was introduced. It didn't start to come into use in studios until in 1999, when we started using it pretty much exclusively. Anyway, so for audio editing, Pro Tools is great, and Logic can work too. I prefer Pro Tools because I just know it so well. I know the key commands. And the key commands are the key. If you're doing Sibelius, Finale, no matter what programs you use, key commands you will cut down on your time dramatically, and they need to be memorized, period. There's no shortcuts to knowing key commands. So now, the speed of your computer, this is another big thing that people talk about. You always want to buy, you need to think about a few different things when buying a computer. It's not always necessarily the smartest thing to do when you are, if you're trying to upgrade your system. You have to think about the types of connections that you have. You know, all the new Macs now have these, you have to have all these adapters to them. Sometimes you can buy a computer that's 2 years old that has, that's perfectly fast enough to run anything that you need it to run, and you don't need to spend the enormous amount of money to buy a brand new computer. So that's something that you need to take into account. If you get an i7 processor from 2 years ago that that has a really that you can buy new, that has a solid state drive in it, that comes with 32 gigs of RAM. These are all considerations. There's a lot of refurb Macs that you can buy out there if you're a Mac guy. Obviously, PCs are a lot cheaper to get into. But for PC programs, typically people don't run Pro Tools on PCs, even though you can. People that run Cubase will run them on PCs. You can run, but I have people that I ask here that I've talked to, the people that run Reaper, people that run PreSonus Studio One, Cubase, Nuendo, Pro Tools. Obviously, all you guys. If you guys start writing right now, I'm sure I'll run the gambit of these things depending on what you do. If you're, here we go. A late 2011, this is Jack, late 2011 MacBook Pro with 3 terabytes solid state. Wow, that's impressive. Pro Tools 12 audio editing, refurbs are great. Save the money on Apple products. Apple products, I've been a huge Apple subscriber. Any of you that followed me on Facebook last year when I did my rant on how Apple ruined iTunes, just the actual iTunes player, which is completely ridiculous. It's got so many I'm sorry, but stupid features on it that don't need to be there. I said whoever designed that should have been fired, and Steve Jobs never would have signed off on a program that is so hideously bad. Most of the new Macs are unupdatable, meaning you can't take the front off. Typically, if you had an iMac up until last year, you could actually use suction cups or bring it someplace, take the front off, take the drive out, put a new drive in, put RAM in, do whatever. Everything now is glued together, and they don't want you to upgrade the things. They want you to buy the things that are already configured like you want them. Well, sometimes you realize, well, I don't have enough processor speed, or I don't have enough RAM for this. I need to do something about this. So these are things you need to take into consideration before you go out and spend the money, because that's a huge purchase to buy a computer. So there's not a lot of good sites that will tell you exactly what you need, especially if you're a film composer and you're running sound libraries. If you look at the minimum requirements for most sound libraries, most virtual instrument libraries, they will give you the bare minimum. Always use that, take that with a grain of salt. If it says, oh, you can run this with 16 gigs of RAM, you know that it's going to take 32 gigs of RAM, because you'll probably get about two plugins on it, and it'll totally, choke the system out. So anyways, that's something you want to think about. Now, Thunderbolt, which is now, being not introduced anymore. So I have a 2000, the computer that I use to do my videos on. I do my video editing. It's sitting right over here. You guys can see it, my laptop there. That is a 2013, I think, MacBook Pro. It's got 16 gigs of RAM. It's got solid state, 1 terabyte solid state drive in it. It's got an i5 processor. It's not a super fast computer, but I have a breakout box for it. If you can see this right here, I have a little breakout box that gives me 3 USB 3 ports. It gives me an Ethernet port. It gives me 2 Thunderbolt ports and an HDMI port, which is killer because I am a big monitor there. Now, obviously, that this isn't supported, doesn't have HDMI in it. It's got a Thunderbolt. This is the last version, this 2013 version, that actually has FireWire 800, 2 USB 2 ports, Thunderbolt, and it has the SD card reader on the side, and it has an optical drive. I can actually load CDs and DVDs in it, which, believe it or not, I actually still use. I will burn CDs and I'll make MP3s out of CDs. Still, I used it today. I put in a couple symphonic. I put in a couple discs into my iTunes library. I still actually do that. The brand of the breakout box is called a Elgato, Elgato, Elgato. I was at the Apple store. I was talking to a guy that does the same kind of stuff that I do, as far as had a and I'm using this in my control room. I use a totally different Pro Tools setup than this. This is for my video editing, and I have Pro Tools 12 on this computer as well. This is to make my videos and do the demos that I do in the videos. But my setup in there is very different. Obviously, I've got the converters that it's hooked up to, and it's hooked up to the mic pre's. It's got the patch bay and everything. But this is really incredibly useful to make the videos for you guys. So anyways, what I wanted to do was figure out a way that I could take this existing laptop, and I have in my editing room over there, I've got another iMac that has Thunderbolt on it as well. But it's probably the same era as this. It might be a year older than this one. And I didn't really feel like spending the money and buying a new Apple, because I'm pretty fed up with Apple at this point. I've been a believer in the company for years. I own many Apple products. I've got an iPhone, but I'm disappointed with the direction of the company, I have to say. I'm not going to lie about that. And the fact that they are making these consumer base, the trash can Mac, which is their top of the line, has not been updated in years. It's really unbelievable. So, if I didn't have the learning curve about moving to another DAW, for example, takes too long. So I don't want to be moving to Cubase or anything right now. To me, that's not a useful use. That's not a practical use of my time. I did want to talk about some other things too, because people ask me about this. I want to talk about basic studio gear to own beyond owning a DAW, whether you're doing film scoring, whether you're doing production work, anything. When I've made some videos, like I said, I've made my living as a music producer for 20 years, recording records. And I'm a recording engineer and a mixing engineer in addition to being a producer. That's what I do. Even though I do really sophisticated, videos on music theory and ear training and film scoring and all this stuff, I'm still a recording engineer. That's my main gig. So some of the things that I wanted to tell you about that are basic studio pieces of gear. If I were to give you 3 things that you buy if you're gonna put a studio together, the first 3 things, microphones, for example, to buy. One would be this, the old SM57. The next would be, and don't tell me I don't have it right here, is a Sennheiser 421, incredibly important. And the third is this, which is a Shure SM7. This is probably, before I even bought a large diaphragm condenser mic, I would buy this particular mic. It's a $350 mic. Incredibly good for any type of vocals. It's primarily, it's historically been used as an announcer mic, like this mic, which is an RE20 by Electro Voice, which is an excellent mic. If you watch Radiohead from one of their basement sessions from about 10 years ago, Tom York is singing through an RE20. Now, I typically use an RE20 as a kick drum mic, but this is one of the most typical mics you will see on talk shows, this particular microphone. This is about a $450 mic. It's got great articulation on the top end. It's a front address mic like this. You talk into it like this. And it's got great articulation for speech, and it's got great bottom end. Okay, so it's a great kick drum mic. This is one of my favorite kick drum mics. It could also double as a vocal mic. Not many people use it as a vocal mic, yet you'll hear it constantly on the radio. It's got tremendous bottom end and is a great mic. And like I said, Tom York, at least in the videos that I saw, was using it to sing through. So I would think that maybe people would use them more if they thought about it. They would think, that's a good mic for speech. It's probably a good mic for vocals. It's one of these two are the most common. You look at any radio stations, radio interviews, these are typically what you'll see people using. Those are the 2 announcer mics. Now, another thing you need to buy is a small diaphragm condenser mic. It doesn't have to be this mic. It could be a Shure KSM 141, which is a really good mic. Could be Rode makes great small diaphragm condensers. This is just an old AKG 452 EB. I bought this on eBay years and years ago for $450 or so. You can find them all day. This one has a removable pad that screws off. These you have to buy separately if you can find them. They made 10 and 20 dB pads for them, and the capsule comes off. This is a C1 capsule. C1 capsule is a cardioid capsule. They made all different types of capsules for it that screw on. They made Omni capsule. They made super cardioid capsules for it. These are great mics. Yes, Bruce Swedien used SM7 on Michael Jackson. Just about every rock singer will use an SM7. It's the most common mic. But you're going to need to own a small diaphragm condenser, and then you're going to need to own a large diaphragm condenser. It doesn't have to be a super fancy, it doesn't have to be a Neumann U47 FET. It doesn't have to be a U87. It can be a Rode. You could buy a Shure makes the KSM 32 and KSM 44. Those are great mics. You don't have to spend a ton, but I would typically, you need to have a small diaphragm condenser mic. I would first buy the large diaphragm condenser mic if you're on a budget, because that's going to also work as a small diaphragm condenser mic. So I would buy these in this order. I'd buy a 57, I'd buy a 421. That'll get you through any type. They're both dynamic mics. That'll get you through any type of recording, any acoustic instrument. that'll work on drum sets and anything, work on guitar amps. I would buy the SM7, and then I would buy a large diaphragm condenser mic next. Then I would buy a small diaphragm condenser mic next. Those are your specific. If you can't afford stereo pairs, then the next thing I would get into is I would buy a second small diaphragm condenser mic or large diaphragm condenser mic of the same kind. Keep that in mind when you're buying these. A lot of people talk about matched pairs. It doesn't have to be matched pairs. Save your money and buy the things when you can afford to buy them. Once again, Reverb or eBay. I go on Reverb because they charge way less, but those are places I would go buy. Buy something with somebody that has a good rating. Look at the microphones. I mean, sometimes I'll buy mics on that I hope will work. I bought an AKG D19 one time about 10 years ago. That's the mic you see in the Beatles above Ringo's drums all the time. That was a typical mic, a dynamic mic that actually sounds more like a condenser mic. It's a great sounding microphone. I bought it and it said as is. And the guy said something like, the last time I used it, it worked. Well, he sent it to me with no cable. And it's got a two-show connector on it, which is a really old-style connector. So I had to buy a cable separately that cost me $75 just to see if the mic works. So I paid $200 for the mic. I paid $100 for the cable. I plugged it in, and thank God it worked. And it sounded great. And I have it here somewhere. I still use it. And the Beatles would use it as an acoustic guitar mic. I mean, they used it for everything. You'll see it. If you look at the Beatles in the studio, anytime you see a mic over the drums, that's a D19 AKG. You can still find them on eBay. But a lot of these older mics, you'd never know what the condition is. So I personally prefer, there's so many mics out there. This is a renaissance time of mic pre's because of the 500 series units, of microphones. Because of home recording and DAWs and the speed of computers, anyone can record at their house major label quality records. You can do your own film scores. You can mix everything at home through the use of plugins and in DAWs. You don't need to have a $30,000 Fairchild to mix through or an SSL G series bus compressor or Allen Smart C2. You don't need to have that in order to do that. There's many, many, many possibilities. And I will do a whole show on these things, on what you can buy at what different price points. And I will have what I need to do is get is to assemble an an assortment. I need to do an endorsement too. Get an assortment of different mics at different price ranges and talk about what a good combination of things would be to put together, because you're knowing what types of mics. Like if I'm going to record a kick drum and I say, okay, you want a mic that has great top end and great bottom end. If you're going to, somebody puts an Royer 121. I haven't talked about ribbon mics yet. I'm a huge fan of ribbon mics. If you go to Nashville, for example, most electric guitars, if you see Dan Huff's setup, he puts a 121 like this, right, with a 57 like this. The 121 records from the front, and he puts the 57 right next to it with the diaphragms matching, and he puts it on one speaker. And that's Dan Huff. If you guys know Dan Huff, who's an excellent producer, he gets great guitar sounds. But that's typically any Nashville. You go to Blackbird, the guy that's gonna, depend if it's Lowell, whoever's the engineer there, he's gonna set up the guitar mic to record like that, unless you tell him otherwise, because that's typically what they do. You have things like, you can get a Neumann KM84, which is really, outdated. They stopped making them in 1986. A phenomenal small diaphragm, one of the best, probably the best small diaphragm condenser mic ever made. Or the KM54, which is the tube version of that. They have these in Nashville all over the place. They're phenomenal sounding. Yeah, the KM84 is one of the best for acoustic guitar. Man, just ridiculously good. But the KM54, the tube version, is excellent as well. But these are super expensive mics. To buy a stereo pair of working KM84s, probably, I would say probably $3,000 or so. They're not cheap. Okay, you can buy a KM184, which Neumann makes brand new, which are not as good sounding, but they're not bad sounding. They don't have the warmth. They're just not made. It's not the same company as it was, 1986, 30 years ago. Okay, so if you're going to buy a KM84, you want to look for ones that were you always want to go find out when these mics that were discontinued, when the last years were, and buy ones as close to that time period as possible. If you're going to buy a U87, the new ones I don't like the sound of. The mid-range is very harsh. They just don't sound the AIs, I think they are. They just don't sound good. The early 70s U87s sound phenomenal. Much, much better. The mid-range is much better. It's not harsh. But you have to look for when they made the change, when the company was bought. Harman Kardon bought the company. I don't know who owns Neumann Neumann now. Sennheiser. I think Sennheiser owns Neumann now. But they make the mics very differently now. So it's not worth. What you want to do is get as late a model as you can and find one that's in as good a shape as you can find. You can always go have them recapped if they need it. These are things, but things to take into consideration. So the idea is to spend the least amount of money as possible and get the biggest bang for your buck. I tell people, spend your money on the instrument first, whether you're buying a vintage synthesizer, you're buying an acoustic guitar, anything that needs to go. If you're a film score, and Mark Isham was telling me, he records, they record acoustic instruments all the time. Listen to a Thomas Newman soundtrack. There's tons of acoustic recorded instruments in them, along with virtual instruments, along with orchestral instruments, all blended together. Some tracks are all, synthesized bass tracks. Some are all acoustic instruments. You might have a harmonica recording in there. So spend your money on the instrument first, then on the microphone, then on the mic pre. Then you can worry about things like EQs. You always have to have a compressor also. That's one of the things that I would spend I would spend money on a compressor too, because it's really important to have at least for doing vocals, you need a compressor. If you're going to do acoustic guitar, you need a compressor. If you're going to do bass, you need a compressor. Those are three things you absolutely need a compressor on. You don't necessarily need compression on drums. Bruce Swedien never used compression on anything. So I would say that mic pre's are probably the third thing in line. If you buy any Neve knockoff, they're all pretty much going to be the same. And I've done shootouts here at the studio, and the biggest difference that's made is in the sound source. If you're going to buy a drum set, all drum sets are going to sound different, head combinations, things like that. Before it hits the mic, it's got to sound great. That's what you get. And then the other thing is that Dennis Chambers was saying in his sounding off, he went up and played Tony Williams drums one time. And he played them, and he said they sounded weird. And then all of a sudden, Tony came up and played them, and it sounded like Tony Williams. And he just couldn't figure it out. It's like, I will tune up a guitar for a band I'm working with if I'm doing an overdub. I'll tune it up. It'll be in tune. I play a chord. Oh, it's perfectly in tune. I hand it to the guitar player. He plays it. It's completely out of tune. So, hold on one second. Yeah, there we go. So I would say that instrument, microphone, mic pre, and then anything else that you need outside of that, purchase that. So that pretty much covers the DAW thing. This is a personal choice, and it really depends on what works the fastest for you. If you're used to something, you're gonna be better at it. I try to not learn new programs that I don't need to learn. There's plenty of stuff to learn. I just bought Finale. Finale is really difficult. It does not have a natural flow to learning how to use it. It's more difficult than Sibelius, and frankly, Sibelius is not that easy to use either. They're just not intuitive. So So you end up watching a lot of tutorials, which it's hard to take the time to do that. Okay, let me talk. I got some other announcements. I've got my Adam Neely sounding off that came out last night. I've got Victor Wooten coming up this week, Mark Lettieri from Snarky Puppy. I've got Rudy Sarzo coming up, who you should know that if you guys are rockers, you know Rudy. I got a lot of other episodes that I've done that I have not edited yet that are going to be coming out over the next couple weeks. And I got some special surprises. Some of the people that you wanted me to get on here, I've heard back from, and they're coming on. So that's all I'm going to say right now. If you want to put in the comments, once again, people that you'd like to see on here, please let me know. I'm going to be getting some people from the classical world. I'm going to be getting people from the rock world as well. So, and I'm doing my first orchestration with a live instrument video coming up in about, as soon as he gets here. I have a cellist coming today, Brian Gibson, who some of you, if you've ever seen Chris Cornell live over the last couple of years, Brian plays cello with Chris Cornell. And I'm going to start my series of going through every instrument in the orchestra and demonstrating things like bowings. So you can look at your DAW and you know what a spiccato bowing is, or you know what different bowing techniques, whether it's a hook bow or it's a ricochet bow, or bowing, or there's different bowings, or what a note sounds like on the D string versus the A string up high. If you're playing up high on one string, and you can listen to the intensity of it. And these are different, whether you're working on with a virtual instrument and you're making decisions on it, because there's key switching you do with east-west samples, for example, where you can play higher up on a certain string on the cello, for example, and it has a completely different sound. So anyways, leave your comments in the comments section as soon as I close out here. And let me know who you want me to get, any questions you have for me, and let me think. Is that everything? That's everything for now. Thank you all for watching. I think tell your friends about my channel here. Sign up here if you're not a subscriber, please. I'm hoping to hit 70,000 subscribers today, hopefully today. If enough of you guys sign up that are not subscribers yet, but are watching this, hit the subscribe button. Victor Wooten is coming out in the next probably 2 days from now or so. That's all for now. Please subscribe here to my Everything Music YouTube channel. And if you're interested in the Beato book, you can write me rickbeato1@gmail.com. The Beato book is my music theory improvisation book that talks about all the same topics I talk about on here, but actually in more depth. So write to me if you're interested in getting a copy. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.